Welcome to a story they tried to erase. A story buried in the mud and hymn books of southern Louisiana, where the air never quite lets go of the past. If you're watching this late at night, turn the lights down and listen closely. Because some say, the moment you hear her name, the lantern flickers near your door. Before we begin, leave a comment with where you're listening from and what time the clock reads where you are right now. Some people hear the sound of wind when they type that hour. Others just silence. Either way, let's start from the beginning. They say the light never went out. Not once. Not in 150 years. Down in St. Landry Parish, where the bayou breathes slow and the frogs sing against a sky thick with memory, there's a story the locals don't tell unless you ask at midnight. They whisper it careful like confession, because the night remembers what the records forgot. In September of 1874, the parish books fell silent. No births, no deaths, no marriages, just silence. 3 weeks erased from history, like a breath held too long. But among the elders, those who still hum the old field songs, they speak of a woman named Eliza Fontaine, a freedwoman with a quiet fire in her hands. She kept a lantern burning in her cabin near the old Opelousas road, the glass blackened from years of smoke. They say it burned through storms, through hunger, through every night the town refused to speak her name. The Freedmen's Bureau report dated September 14, 1874 reads, "Disturbances in St. Landry Parish. Colored citizens unaccounted for. Several structures burned. Inquiry pending." The inquiry never came. The officer who wrote that line, Lieutenant Joseph Black, disappeared a month later. His horse was found on the roadside, reins cut. The Bureau's last note, fate unknown. Folklore filled the gaps. They say the last thing seen before the fires died was Eliza's light, a single steady flame moving through the smoke. Children born decades later pointed to that same glow in the fields and asked their mothers who it was. The answer was always the same. Don't follow the light, child. She's counting the names, and in those names lay the weight of what the records erased. A half-burned hymn survives in the St. Landry Parish Songbook 1903, scribbled in pencil at the edge of a page. One light for the lost one, for the found one, for the souls still waiting underground. No one claimed to write it. No one remembers singing it. But it's still there, faint graphite scratches beneath official ink. If you ever stand at the site where her church once stood, the ground still smells of oil and charred wood. The trees lean away from that place as if wind refuses to touch it. And when the moon sits low, sometimes you'll see a flicker of light in the cypress fog. Not bright, not wild, just steady, patient. The sheriff's office never recorded it, but the locals know. They call it Eliza's Lantern. The archives, of course, tell a simpler story. Unrest among freed citizens. Incident classified. No photographs, no testimonies. But the WPA Folklore Project in the 1930s found something else, a field notebook labeled WPA LA 192, later overwritten in the index. Inside, a collector described a woman's voice heard near Opelousas, singing of names in the fire. That notebook vanished before the archive received it. Still, the voice survives. One recording, scratchy warbled, captured in 1938 on a hand-crank cylinder now stored in a mislabeled box at the Library of Congress. You can hear her hum just before the tape cuts. "Don't follow the light, child." And then, nothing. But every legend leaves its echo. Some say her flame still moves when storms rise. Others say when the church bell rings without wind, Eliza is near checking her list again. Because that night in 1874, the night when every official record stopped, something else began. Something that refused to die with ink or fire. History calls it a disturbance. Folklore calls it a reckoning. And somewhere between the two lies the truth. The light still burns, and tonight we follow it. September 1874. The air over St. Landry Parish hung thick heavy as the breath of something that refused to die. You could smell the cane before you saw it, blackened from summer burning sweet and sour all at once. The harvest should have brought relief, but not that year. That year the fields carried more than sugar. They carried memory. The war had been over less than a decade, yet the sound of marching boots still haunted the dirt roads that snaked through Louisiana's heart. Men in blue had left, men in gray had vanished, and what remained were the echoes and the debts. Freedmen walking with papers that meant little. Planters standing on porches with faces carved from ash. The flags were gone, but the fears stayed. Opelousas, the parish seat, sat like a ghost of its own. A cluster of brick and timber, post office, courthouse, church, jail. By day it was quiet. By night the lamps flickered low, and even the dogs stopped barking. Because everyone knew something was waiting in the dark. Reconstruction had come like a promise, a word spoken too loud, too fast in a room not ready to hear it. Schools for the freedmen had opened, then closed. Ballots were printed, then burned. The Bureau had set up its office beside the river, a clapboard building where letters of freedom were handed out like prayers, and then one day the door stood open, the papers scattered, the clerk gone. You can still find fragments of those letters in the archives. The handwriting faint, the ink bleeding through the paper. To the Bureau, I asked protection for my wife and children in St. Landry Parish. No one ever wrote back. The bayou swallowed more than just names. It took wagons, houses, songs. A priest recorded in his journal that the water rose higher than it ever had, as though the earth itself wished to wash the slate clean. But what it washed away was not sin. It was evidence. By 1874, Louisiana was caught in its own haunting. Federal troops had pulled back to New Orleans. Local militias called themselves Redeemers. And in the countryside, men in white hoods gathered under the cypress trees, whispering about order, about God, about revenge. They said they were saving the South. But the only thing they saved were the old ghosts. St. Landry became a borderland between two realities, the one written down and the one lived after dark. In the records, it was rebuilding. In the fields, it was fear. Women walked in pairs to fetch water. Children learned not to cry after sunset. And every creak in the cabin might have been the wind or something else. Folklore began to rise from that silence. They said the river moaned on nights without wind. They said lanterns moved on their own along the levee. They said names whispered from the wells, names the papers never printed. And through it all, the church bell of St. Mary's rang without hands. A traveling preacher once wrote in his diary, "I saw a light across the fields near Opelousas. Thought it a soul in torment. When I approached it, vanished, leaving the smell of lamp oil and rain." He left the parish the next morning. Everywhere the lines between fact and superstition blurred. The freedmen called it the time of the walking lights. Planters called it nonsense until their barns burned. Sheriffs called it hysteria until their deputies vanished on patrol. And still the records tried to keep up, tried to sound calm, official, untouched by fear. But even the handwriting trembles. Disturbances reported near the Negro church east of Opelousas. Investigation delayed by floodwaters. Floodwaters, always the same excuse. As if the river itself were an accomplice. Eliza Fontaine lived on the edge of that map where the parish faded into swamp. A widow by 29, mother of 2 buried children. She worked as a washerwoman cleaning the garments of people who would not look her in the eye. Every week she walked to the church with a small notebook tied in cloth, names written carefully, dates, places. No one knew where she learned to write. Some say a Union soldier taught her. Others say it came to her in a dream. Either way, she wrote when no one else dared to. Her cabin stood near a cluster of cypress that leaned toward the river. Crooked, half-drowned roots tangled like old hands. Inside, the smell of soap and lamp oil, the hum of frogs beyond the door. On the table, one Bible, one candle stub, and that book of names. Witnesses later said they saw her there every night, murmuring over the pages like prayer. To her, it wasn't haunting, it was memory work. But to those who feared what she remembered, it was threat. The summer of 1874 was cruel. Heat that made the nights shimmer, air that pressed against the lungs. Then came the rain, not soft but hard. Sudden drumming against roofs until whole roads vanished in mud. When the flood finally receded, the church was gone. All that remained was the smell. That's when the lights began. Some said they were will-o'-the-wisps, natural, explainable. Some said gas from the swamp. But the old women of the parish shook their heads and said no. Those are not swamp lights. Those are the souls still waiting to be counted. For decades, every retelling changed the details, but never the truth beneath them. A government in collapse, a community silenced, a woman who refused to let names be forgotten. And somewhere between the written record and the whispered song, St. Landry Parish became a wound that never closed. A parish haunted not by ghosts, but by memory itself. Listen carefully. The air here doesn't just move, it carries. Every breeze over the bayou might be a voice. Every drop of rain might be a word erased too soon. History calls this reconstruction. The people who lived it called it something else. They called it the waiting time, a time when no one trusted the light, and everyone prayed the darkness would pass. But in 1874, it didn't. The first trace appears quietly, almost by accident, inside a government ledger no one was supposed to read. A torn page misfiled in a drawer marked Miscellaneous Parish Reports, 1874. The handwriting trembles as if the ink itself was afraid to stay. Property destroyed, Negro church burned, cause undetermined. Several freed citizens unaccounted for. A few centimeters below a faint pencil note, locals report lights near the ruins at night. And then, a red slash. One decisive stroke censoring the line completely. Officially, it never existed. But that's how every haunting begins in Louisiana, not with a scream, but with an erasure. The bureau records are thin for that autumn, fewer entries. Shorter sentences, colder tone. No emotion, no names. Each report reads like it was written by someone holding his breath. But between those clipped lines, there's silence that vibrates like something buried alive. One dispatch from Lieutenant Joseph Black, dated September 14, 1874. Colored congregation reports repeated threats. Requests guard detail. Appropriation unavailable. Witness states unidentified figures observed in swamp with torches. The following week, his handwriting grows uncertain. Return delayed due to illness. Horses spooked near Cane River. After that, nothing. Only the notation officer missing. His file closes with 2 words, fate unknown. It's a phrase that echoes across nearly every Louisiana archive of that era bureaucratic final. And yet, hollow. Folklore begins exactly where the paper ends. Old voices from the 1930s WPA Folklore Project, brittle as shellac recorded on warped cylinders, speak in whispers you can barely understand. Women in their 80s and 90s, recalling their mother's fears. One of them, identified as Miss C.B., age 89, Opelousas said softly. I seen her light, yes. She walked through smoke, no sound, no fear. My mama say she counting the lost ones. Say every time she finish one name, another starts calling. The interviewer, a young white man from New Orleans, scribbled in his margin, likely superstition. He never understood what those women meant by counting. He thought it was arithmetic. It was remembrance. Eliza Fontaine was never a name of rank or wealth. Born in bondage sometime around 1845, freed before she turned 20, she made her living washing other people's clothes, folding their silence into neat bundles. Her small cabin stood at the edge of the cane line where mist and water met. Every night after her work, she lit a lantern and sat at a table built from scrap pine. There she wrote in a small ledger names, dates, fragments of hymns. No one taught her to write formally, but her hand was careful, deliberate, as if each letter carried a pulse. Folklore says she believed writing the dead kept them from vanishing a second time. That's why she called her book The Living Record. Every stroke of ink an act of defiance. The church elders thought it was madness. The planters called it witchcraft. But the freedmen, those who'd seen their families lost to fire or flood, called it truth. An entry from the Freedmen's Bureau Office, Washington, Louisiana, dated August 1874, includes a complaint. Fontaine-colored female requests aid for missing son approx. Age 10. Child last seen near the old prayer house east of Opelousas. No further report. 2 months later, another file references local hysteria and rumors of ghosts among the Negro population. The phrase ghosts among the Negro population repeats in 3 different reports. It's almost clinical a label for grief. But the people living through it didn't call them ghosts. They called them voices. They said the wind itself had learned to speak. A preacher named Reverend Amos Green, himself a former soldier with the U.S. Colored Troops, wrote in his field diary in 1875, "There is a woman who prays with light. She calls the names of the lost as though writing on the air. The people believe she is chosen. The white men say she is cursed. I do not know which is true." He died 2 years later in a flood near Lafayette. His diary survived water-stained, the ink feathered into ghosts. By the 1880s, the story of the Lantern Woman had spread along the bayou. Migrants working sugar and timber carried it in their songs. Each version changed slightly. Sometimes her name was Liza, sometimes Althea, sometimes no name at all. Just the woman who writes. A field hymn collected in 1891 went, "Write, sister, write till the river runs clear, till the fire forgets, till the names reappear." There's a rhythm to it, slow, circular, like footsteps in water. You can almost hear the echo of her pen scratching against damp paper. Folklore always fills the spaces history leaves empty. And St. Landry Parish was nothing but spaces, gaps, in ledgers missing months, erased witnesses. Between every silence, the legend grew. Parents warned their children not to follow lights after dark, said they belonged to the restless. But the elders said those lights were blessings, that if you walked quietly behind them, you'd find the place where truth still breathes. The contradiction was never resolved. And maybe that's the point. In 1882, the Opelousas Courier published a strange notice, buried beneath livestock prices. Report of a wandering flame near the Negro cemetery. Observers state, "No wind present." Believed to be natural occurrence. Yet the same issue carried a church announcement, "Memorial for the Lost Sept." 13 sundown. No pastor's name, no location, just the time. Sundown, the hour the bell rings by itself. A French priest visiting from Baton Rouge wrote to his diocese that same autumn, "I have seen with my own eyes a light that burns in defiance of the wind. I approached and found a small lantern hanging upon no hook, suspended by air itself. When I blinked, it was gone." His letter is still in the diocesan archive, though someone later drew a line through the last sentence and wrote, "Optical illusion." But folklore doesn't erase. It multiplies. By 1895, Eliza's lantern was part of local sermons, fairground songs, even traveling minstrel acts twisted into parody. White performers joked about haunted housemaids. But in the black churches, her story was whispered with reverence, retold on nights of thunder when children huddled by the door. They said she was still walking, still writing. That if you stayed awake long enough, you'd hear the scratch of her pen in the dark. One woman interviewed by the WPA in 1938 said, "My grandmama say the light moved like it breathin'. Not fast, not wild, just steady like somebody walking home. And when it passed your window, the dogs go quiet. That's when you know she's near." The interviewer asked if she believed it was a ghost. The woman smiled. "If it was a ghost, we'd be scared. But we ain't. We just listen." There's something about Louisiana folklore. It doesn't separate the sacred from the sorrow. Everything bleeds together. The hymns become testimonies. The testimonies become hauntings. Every swamp, every tree carries the residue of what people won't say aloud. In St. Landry, that residue was Eliza. The one who wrote when others were told not to. The one who kept counting after the ink ran dry. A document discovered in 1910, long after her death, lists property transfers in the parish. At the bottom in smaller cramped script, witnessed by E. Fontaine. No official explanation, no title. But her name, her handwriting there again, resurfacing from beneath decades of silence. The folklore says she made one promise before she died. That when the bell stopped ringing, she would finally rest. But the bell never stopped. It rings still faintly through wind and static in recordings of local church choirs. Somewhere in the mix of voices, a tremor of higher pitch like metal, struck in water. No one else hears it. But if you listen with your eyes closed, it's there. They say that's Eliza keeping time. By the time the 20th century began, St. Landry's story had already turned into warning, then myth, then half-forgotten rumor. But the field collectors knew better. They wrote in coded language to preserve what officials would censor. A 1939 WPA field note reads, one subject recounted a woman who wrote by lamplight symbol of resistance under erasure. Spiritual significance appears evident. She may represent collective memory. Collective memory. That's the closest phrase academia ever found for haunting. Even now, in the archives of Baton Rouge, the same boxes that hold the bureau reports also contain anonymous letters. Unsigned, undated. Each begins the same way. Her light is still here. No one knows who wrote them. But they appear decade after decade, 1915, 1924, 1936, 1951. Always the same ink, always the same phrase. Fact or folklore, at this point it doesn't matter. Because both serve the same purpose to remember. And remembrance in a land built on forgetting is the most dangerous act of all. When the officials stopped writing, the people started whispering. When the churches fell silent, the swamps began to sing. And through every silence, that one name, Eliza Fontaine, kept burning like the flame she carried. If you stand in St. Landry today, you can still feel it. Not see feel. That pause in the air just before the wind shifts. That faint shimmer in the mist when the moon is low. Every shadow seems to wait for something, for someone. And maybe, just maybe, if you listen long enough, you'll hear the scratch of a pen across paper that no longer exists, and a whisper counting softly one name at a time, because the record never truly closed. It just changed hands, and in this parish of ghosts, the dead don't haunt the living haunt the dead. There are stories you can read on a page, and there are stories you can only feel through the air. This one breathes. By the summer of 1874, the people of St. Landry had learned to live in whispers. The bureau men had stopped coming. The soldiers had gone. The world had turned quiet, the kind of quiet that makes even footsteps sound like sin. The days were long and swollen with heat. The cane leaves shimmered in haze, and the bayou swelled thick and brown. And at night, the light came back. It started small, harmless, aglow across the fields that the children called the walking candle. They'd laugh point chase after it with sticks. Until one night, one child didn't come back. His name was Caleb, 10 years old, son of a woman named Ruth Daniels, who worked at the mill on the river bend. She told neighbors she saw him follow a flicker past the oak grove at sundown. They called after him, but the sound seemed to sink into the fog. When dawn came, they found his shoes on the levee dry, untouched, as if he'd stepped right out of them. The sheriff wrote a 2-line note. Child missing, presumed drowned, mother hysterical. That was all. No search party, no inquiry. Just words on paper. Cold and flat. But in the settlement, the whispers started again. Ruth swore she saw a lantern bobbing outside her window 3 nights later. Not close. Just enough for the light to reach her hands as she prayed. And in that glow, she said she saw a shape, a woman's silhouette holding something that looked like a book. Ruth called her name into the dark. The figure raised the lantern higher, then turned and vanished into the mist. She fell to her knees. because in that instant she heard a voice, soft, steady, counting. 31, 32. Her son was the 33rd name on the list. The next week, the preacher of the burned church, Reverend Amos Green, gathered what remained of his congregation beneath a tattered canvas roof. They sang the old songs broken by rain and the buzzing of mosquitoes. He told them, "If we can't read the record, the Lord will read it for us." But as he spoke, a wind rose from the west, sharp, unnatural, and the flame of every lamp in that place leaned toward the same point in the field. Someone gasped. There through the cane a light moved, slow, deliberate, like it was listening. Reverend Green froze mid-sentence. The choir fell silent. For a moment, all you could hear was the hum of frogs and the creak of the wooden benches. Then the light stopped, as if it had heard its name, and began to sway side to side like a pendulum or a heartbeat. When the Reverend stepped forward, the lanterns of the congregation dimmed at once. Every flame bent toward the same invisible pull toward that one glow across the field. Someone whispered, "Eliza's watching." And for the first time in his ministry, Amos Green had no scripture to answer with. That night, a storm came down heavy and quick. Wind tore the canvas from the poles, and the rain sounded like fists on the earth. People scattered to their cabins, clutching their children, their lamps, their fear. But in one cabin, light kept burning. It was Ruth's. Neighbors said they saw her through the window, kneeling beside her bed, the lantern before her, the Bible open to a blank page. They said she was writing something in the air, her hand moving slow, tracing invisible letters. The rain hammered the roof, but her candle never went out. By morning, her cabin was empty. No footprints, no body. Just the scent of lamp oil and wet paper. The parish divided after that. Half called it blasphemy, claimed witchcraft curses the work of Satan himself. The other half whispered that the Lord had simply taken back what man refused to honor. Either way, no one slept easy. The sheriff wrote one last entry that month. Inexplicable disturbances near Negro settlement. Advise caution. And then nothing. But the people remember what came next. It was late September harvest time. The air thick with the smell of cane smoke sweat. Men and women worked under the fading sun, their backs bent, their eyes fixed on the horizon. Then, a bell rang. Once, twice, 13 times. Slow, uneven, the old church bell, though its tower had been gone for years. Every head turned toward the field. And there, rising through the mist, came the light. Not one, but many. Dozens of flames drifting through the cane, spreading, swirling as if carried by invisible hands. Children screamed, elders began to pray. The overseer dropped his hat and ran. From the ridge above, a farmer swore he saw faces in those lights, calm, unafraid. He told it to his dying day. They weren't ghosts. They were waiting. They were walking. The fires began soon after. No one ever agreed on how. Some said a lightning strike. Some said sabotage. But the direction of the wind, the shape of the smoke, it looked like handwriting in the sky. A line of flame, curling, bending, crossing, as if someone were writing a name across the heavens. By the time the flames reached the edge of the field, the church bell rang again, clear, loud, impossible. People ran toward it, not away. They said they heard voices singing through the smoke. No melody, anyone knew. Just a chant rising and falling, one name after another. When dawn broke, the field was ash. The cane flattened the air thick with the smell of burned oil. And in the center, untouched, stood a single lantern still burning. The Bureau never returned to investigate. But a man named William Reeve, once a Union clerk, later filed a report in New Orleans claiming he'd found a small book near Opelousas that month, soaked, half-burned, filled with faint writing. He described the words as repeating names, each followed by the same phrase, fate unknown. The book vanished before it reached the archive. Reeve died of fever weeks later. No one claimed his belongings. Years passed, but the people of St. Landry never forgot that night. The Lantern Field, they called it. Children grew up forbidden to walk there after dark. Even by day, the ground stayed black, the ash refusing to wash away. Farmers said nothing grew there for 50 years. Even the crows avoided it. And yet, every September 13th, someone would see a light. Always in the same place, always just at dusk, never closer than the sound of a breath. Those who dared to follow said the air grew cold, colder than winter, and the smell of oil and rain filled their lungs. One man said he saw the outline of a woman kneeling, her hand moving across invisible paper. He called to her once, twice, and the light turned, flared, then went out. When he returned home, he found a single page on his doorstep. The writing was faint, but he swore he could read the first line. You have seen the record. By the 1890s, people stopped talking openly about Eliza. But her story had already slipped into everything, into lullabies, into sermons, into silence. You can still hear her in the old hymns if you listen for it, that pause before the final note, that inhale before the amen. The moment the choir breathes together, as if waiting for something unseen to join them. That's her, still counting, still naming. A folklorist once asked a woman in St. Landry what she believed the light truly was. The old woman smiled and said, "What is a ghost but a memory that refuses to keep quiet?" Then she leaned forward and whispered, "And what is history but a ghost that learned how to write?" Every haunting has its moment of return, the night the past decides it's tired of being buried. For St. Landry, that moment was 1874. For everyone else, it's whenever they remember. And even now, when the moon is thin and the frogs go quiet, you can stand by the ruins and hear the faintest sound, not wind, not rain, but a woman writing. Each stroke of her pen, each echo of that bell, another name lifted out of the dark. The people say the light never left. It just waits steady, patient for someone brave enough to look. Because in the heart of Louisiana's silence, history still burns. And some stories will never let themselves be erased. History doesn't die, it waits, sometimes for years, sometimes for lifetimes. It hides in footnotes, in mislabeled boxes, in songs that people hum without remembering why. And in St. Landry Parish, it waited in the dark, humming softly beneath the scent of oil and cane. The Bureau reports ended in 1874, but the story did not. It resurfaced slowly, stubbornly, through people who never met Eliza Fontaine, but felt her anyway. By 1936, the world had changed. Trains roared, telegraphs, clicked radios filled the night air with voices. But Louisiana, especially the lowland parishes, still carried the weight of silence. And in that silence, someone found the first clue. A letter appeared at the Louisiana State Archives that spring, unsigned, but typed on onion skin paper that smelled faintly of lamp oil. It read, "I am sending a small book recovered from a trunk discovered near Opelousas during a state inventory." The handwriting is delicate but firm. Each page lists a name followed by 2 words, fate unknown. The last page ends with the date September 13th, 1874. There is no author's signature. The letter bore no return address. The ledger it described, catalogued briefly as Item 2041, Unverified Parish Register, vanished within the year. The official record claims archival relocation, but no one ever saw it again. Yet fragments survived. An archivist named Anna L. Givens, new to the department and meticulous to a fault, had typed 4 of the book's pages before it disappeared. She kept carbon copies in her desk drawer against policy, but out of instinct. Those pages are still on file today, each name handwritten first, then retyped beneath ends with the same phrase, "Still waiting." In her personal journal found years later, Givens wrote, "The names are ordinary, but the rhythm of the writing feels deliberate, like a prayer." As I typed, I felt watched, as if someone stood behind me whispering the words before I could press the keys. The smell of oil grew stronger with each line. I went home sick. She left the archives the following spring. Her resignation letter was one line only. Some records are not meant to be filed. Around that same time, a WPA field worker, Lawrence White, 29, college-educated skeptical, was assigned to collect Negro folklore and superstition in St. Landry Parish. He arrived in May of 1938, carrying a notebook, a portable recorder, and too much confidence. He didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in documentation. His first week, he interviewed 9 residents. 7 mentioned the light. 4 named Eliza. One elderly woman corrected him when he called it a ghost story. "It ain't a ghost, son. Ghosts don't care about the living. She care." White's notes, now yellowed and brittle, include sketches, crude maps of the cane fields, dots where the lights were said to appear. At the bottom of one page he wrote, "Every time someone says her name, the lanterns start in their eyes, like they remember seeing it, even if they didn't." That line was underlined twice. The recordings he made still exist, 12 fragile wax cylinders labeled Opelousas field interviews. Most contain only static laughter and background noise. But one cataloged as Cylinder 7B holds something stranger. A woman's voice, faint almost inside the hiss, hums a fragment of a hymn. One light for the lost, one for the found. White's logbook notes. No singer present at the time of recording. Possibly residual echo. Residual echo, or something older. After White's death in 1952, his widow sold the cylinders to a collector in New Orleans. Half were damaged in a warehouse flood, but the fragments survived, warped, ghostly, unplaceable. When audio technicians restored it decades later, they noticed a second sound beneath the melody, the soft scratch of pen on paper. They thought it was interference. It wasn't. The 20th century brought its own kinds of hauntings. Fluorescent, bureaucratic, modern. Historians dismissed Eliza Fontaine as folklore born from trauma. Psychologists called it collective grief transference. But the people who lived in St. Landry didn't need definitions. They still lit lamps every September. They still told their children, "Don't follow the light, child, she's working tonight." And every once in a while, someone new, a teacher, a journalist, a skeptic, would try to prove the story wrong. In 1972, Professor Henry LaRoche from Tulane University began a research project on African spiritual survivals in Louisiana. He interviewed dozens of residents, most elderly, most cautious. In his field notes, he described their manner as respectful silence, fear disguised as politeness. They refused to speak Eliza's name until he offered to pray first. Then one woman, identified only as Sister Ruthie, age 94, agreed to talk. She said, "You don't need to find her, Professor. She already found you. When you hear the bell, that's her turning the page." LaRoche recorded the interview. When played back, a faint sound followed her last sentence, 3 soft chimes, evenly spaced. No bells existed within a mile of that cabin. He left Louisiana a week later, citing illness. In his final report, he wrote, "Some legends are living documents. They rewrite themselves through us." The archives kept changing. In 1989, a restoration team digitizing old Freedmen's Bureau microfilms reported strange image noise on the St. Landry frames. When scanned, faint gray streaks appeared, curving lines that resembled handwriting. Technicians enhanced contrast and saw the phrase repeated over and over, "still waiting." They logged it as film deterioration due to humidity. But one intern printed a still image before the file was corrected. It showed a shape between the lines, human faint holding what looked like a light. That intern, now an archivist herself, keeps the print framed above her desk. When asked why, she says softly, "Because she was the first archivist." In the 1990s, the legend rose again. A local historian, Marie Saunier, published The Missing Ledger Parish Shadows of 1874. She compared the Bureau report's church records and property logs. Her findings were unsettling. Every ledger from September 1874 used identical handwriting, even though 5 different clerks were on duty. All 5 had resigned the same month. Their signatures never appeared again. Saunier's conclusion. The record was rewritten all at once by a single hand. Her house burned 2 years later. Electrical fault, they said. Firefighters reported one curious detail. On her desk amid the ashes stood an oil lantern. Its glass blackened but unbroken. Inside, a single drop of oil, still wet. The 2000s brought digital tools, scanners, algorithms, cold precision, and yet the pattern continued. Historians mapping disappearances during Reconstruction noticed that every parish with major unrest had a gap in its records lasting 2 to 3 weeks. The longest gap, St. Landry, 21 days. The same 3 weeks when Eliza's light first appeared. When they plotted the missing entries on a digital map, something unexpected emerged. The coordinates formed a spiral not random, but deliberate, as if circling toward a center. That center matched the location of the old church ruins. The data analyst called it coincidence. The folklorist who reviewed it called it proof the land keeps memory. In 2007, a photographer named Isaiah Dupre began a personal project capturing lost spiritual sites of the South. He visited St. Landry in August on a humid evening thick with insects and dusk. He shot 20 frames of the church ruins, old stones, moss, a field of wild grass. But in frame 12, something shifted. At the center of the image, faint but visible, a small flame. A single lantern glow hovering mid-air. Dupre swore no one else was there. He sent the image for analysis, no manipulation detected. Exposure, normal, focus, steady, just a light that shouldn't be. He titled the photograph, Her Page. When asked later why, he said, it felt like she was still writing. Folklore and fact began to blur so completely that even skeptics hesitated. A journalist from The Advocate visited the parish in 2015 to write about Southern ghost tourism. He left with more questions than answers. His article never printed. But his notebook, later donated to the archive, holds one unfinished line at the bottom of the last page. It's not a haunting, it's an inventory. Every few years, new evidence appears, a rediscovered hymn, a mislabeled recording, a half-legible document. And each time someone insists it's coincidence. Humidity, chemical degradation, tricks of the mind. But then another voice answers back through music, through static, through wind. Always the same message. Keep counting. If you visit St. Landry today, you'll see nothing out of place, just road grass air. But wait until the light fades. Stand near the church ruins. Listen for the crickets. When they stop, when the silence presses in, you'll feel it. A pulse, a rhythm in the air, as if the land itself were breathing. Some say it's the sound of the bayou, the tide, the wind, the frogs. But those who know better call it by another name, the turning page. Because every September, when the humidity thickens and the stars hang low, a faint glow rises from the field, the same spot, the same hour. It moves slowly in patterns that look almost like writing. Scholars call it methane gas. Believers call it grace, but either way, it still writes. Fact says Eliza Fontaine was a freedwoman who kept lists of names. Folklore says she never stopped. Fact says the lantern is a metaphor. Folklore says go see for yourself. Somewhere in the middle between data and dust lies the truth that remembrance itself can be a haunting, that to write the names of the forgotten is to light a candle against eternity, and that not all flames burn to destroy, some burn to remember. So when the night air grows still, when you catch the scent of lamp oil where no lamp stands, remember this: every fate unknown in the archive, every erased name, someone is still writing it down. Maybe not with ink, maybe not with paper, but with light. Because St. Landry Parish was never just haunted, it was documented. By a woman who refused to let memory die. By generations who turned grief into gospel. By a flame that refuses to go out. And tonight, if you stand there long enough, you might see it too, that one light still steady in the mist. It doesn't move, It doesn't flicker. It just waits, waiting for the next name, for the next witness, for the next page in the book that can't burn. History rarely shouts. It hums, a tone beneath everything, the wind, the tape, the static of time itself. And if you listen long enough, you'll hear it change pitch. That's how the living know when the past has turned to face them again. In 2019, the Louisiana Historical Society announced a routine digitization project, converting century-old bureau files into high-resolution scans. Among them, Box 17, Folder 9, St. Landry Parish, 1874. It had been scanned dozens of times before, but this time something different appeared. The technician noticed it first. A thin pulse of light in the preview window. Too slow for glare, too rhythmic for error. Frame by frame it moved across the page, a glow that curved, hesitated, looped. When the sequence was stitched together, it spelled two words. Keep counting. They thought it was a prank. Software error. Camera lens. But the metadata showed no reflection, no interference, no reason. Just light. A light that spelled. And then the scanner shut down by itself. The room went dark. And for a brief moment, every screen flickered with the same frame, a woman's hand holding a lantern. When power returned, the image was gone. But the file saved automatically remained. The archivists replayed it again and again, frame by frame. And in the margin, written faintly in digital noise, were coordinates. They traced to a field outside Opelousas, the same ground where the old church once stood. 1 week later, a small team from LSU's anthropology department drove out there at dawn. Fog still clung low, thick as breath. They brought cameras, magnetometers, drones. The air was quiet. Too quiet. At first, nothing. Then, as the sun broke over the trees, one of the instruments began to click, irregular, steady. Beneath the soil, the scanner detected fragments of metal, glass, and carbon residue arranged in a straight line about 20 feet long. When they dug, they found melted brass pieces of a lantern, and beneath it blackened paper fused to stone. The smell was faint but familiar, lamp oil and rain. The fragments were sent to Baton Rouge for preservation. Infrared imaging revealed ghostly traces of ink on the carbonized pages, hundreds of names written in faint brown, repeating the same refrain. Still waiting. Still waiting. At the bottom of the last sheet, the only part intact, one line stood clear. When they stop writing, I will write again. No date, no signature. Only a small mark beside it in E. Eliza. That night, one of the technicians, a young woman named Corinne Duval, stayed late in the lab. She said she wanted to finish tagging the fragments. But colleagues later recalled that she kept glancing toward the light of her monitor, as if something behind her reflected there. At 11:47 p.m., the motion sensor in the lab tripped. The security camera recorded 38 seconds of video. Corinne sitting alone, the room dim. And behind her on the reflection of the glass case, a faint amber glow. Like a lantern. The next morning she was fine, shaken pale. But she refused to speak of it. Only later did she whisper to a co-worker, "It wasn't scary. It felt like someone checking my work." By the time the fragments were authenticated, the press had already heard rumors. They called it the Ghost Ledger. News crews came, cameras rolled, experts speculated. But none of them could agree on one thing: who had written those pages. The handwriting matched no known sample, but it matched itself perfectly across a century. Digital comparison showed that the strokes aligned with the handwriting in the Freedmen's Bureau reports. The same ones from 1874. The ones supposedly written by 5 different clerks, each letter identical in rhythm and pressure, as though one hand had written them all. And that's when the files began to fail. Hard drives corrupted. Scans flickered. Transcripts erased themselves mid-edit. In every corrupted file, the same phrase appeared at the bottom of the error log, light detected. The IT department called it coincidence. The archivists stopped arguing. Some stories don't need belief, they only need witnesses. Meanwhile, the people of St. Landry heard the news. They didn't call it a discovery. They called it a return. A month later, they gathered near the field again. Elders, teachers, children. Each carried a small candle. No one organized it formally. They just came drawn by something older than invitation. When the sun went down, the first candle flickered out. Then another. And from the fog beyond the line of trees, another light appeared. Not bright, not harsh, just steady. It moved slow, crossing the field until it stopped near the ruin. No one screamed. No one ran. They simply watched every candle bowing toward that single glow. And someone no one remembers who began to hum. A tune with no words at first. Then soft syllables rising. One light for the lost, one for the found. The sound rolled like a tide, voices old and young joined by something unseen. For a few minutes the field shimmered, all light, no fear. Then as the last note faded, the glow dimmed and disappeared. Later journalists wrote about optical anomalies. Scientists cited thermal gradients. But those who were there never questioned it. They said the night had come full circle, that the ledger was finished, and yet. The next morning on the parish notice board, someone found a piece of paper pinned by a rusted nail. The handwriting was precise, deliberate, almost old-fashioned. 3 words only. Keep the light. No one saw who left it. The ink was still wet. After that, the archive quieted. The scanners ran clean. The air felt lighter, the smell gone. For a while, it seemed the story had finally rested. But history never rests, not truly. Months later, when technicians revisited the recovered ledger under ultraviolet light, they found something new. Invisible before now, glowing faintly blue words written between the lines. Not in ink. In pressure marks, as if a stylus had traced them on top of the page. They read, "I have seen the record. The names are home." In the recording of that revelation, when the archivist reads those words aloud, there's a sound at the end of the tape. Not static, not interference, a faint metallic toll, 13 times, like a bell, like a heartbeat, like a closing line. And if you slow the recording down, if you stretch the waveform and listen between the chimes, you can hear something else beneath the hum, beneath the air conditioning, beneath the living. A voice, low, calm, almost smiling, saying the same 2 words. Still waiting. They never released that version publicly, but every archivist who's heard it describes the same feeling. Not terror, not sadness, but peace. The sense that somewhere, somehow, a promise had been kept. Because Eliza Fontaine's story was never about ghosts. It was about persistence. It was about a woman who refused to let the world forget its own. A hand that kept writing when others stopped. A light that refused to die. And tonight, when the air is heavy and the bayou hums low, you can still feel that pulse under your feet, the rhythm of her name. Eliza, the clerk of the forgotten, the scribe of the waiting. And maybe that's the truth behind every haunting, that the dead don't return to frighten us. They return to remind us to remember. The light never really left. It only learned to travel differently. Some say it lives now in memory, in the hum of electric wires that cross the old road, in the reflection off the bayou when the moon sits low. Or in the pause between thunder and rain when everything listens. It's been 150 years since that September, since the ledgers fell silent, since the bell rang without wind, since the night the flames wrote their last name into the dark. And yet, every generation finds her again. Not in books, but in moments. In the quiet things that never make the archive, the soft voice of an old woman saying, "Don't forget, child." The flicker of a candle when no door is open. The word waiting penciled in the corner of a parish register no one's touched in decades. Today, the field where the church once stood looks ordinary. Grass grows where ash once lay. The road nearby hums with passing cars, people on their way to work, children on buses, the living rushing past, what the dead built to last. But when dusk comes, when the sun slips behind the oaks, and the mist curls up from the water, something happens. The air thickens, slows. And if you stop breathing for a moment, just listen, you'll hear a rhythm that isn't wind. Soft, steady, like pages turning. Some say it's the sound of insects. Others say it's the field remembering the night it learned to glow. Either way, it's the same sound that was on that recording. The same hum that threaded through the bureau files. The same breath that moved through Eliza Fontaine's lungs when she whispered each name into the dark. The descendants still live here, families who never left, families who changed their names to hide from records that erased them. They keep candles on windowsills every September. Not as superstition, but as respect. A woman named Lucille Baptiste, great-granddaughter of one of the vanished, says she never lights hers all the way. She lets it burn halfway down, then blows it out to leave room. She says for the other half, the one she carries. Even now you can find traces in unexpected places. An oil stain on the library floor that won't wash away. A folder that smells faintly of rain. A soundcheck recording from a museum exhibit where a faint voice hums beneath the narrator, no words. Just that tune. One light for the lost, one for the found. Archivists call it ambient feedback. But one of them, a young intern, wrote in her logbook, "When I heard it, I didn't feel alone, because that's what the story became, not a haunting, but a hand reaching across time. A reminder that memory is work, and work is sacred." Eliza Fontaine's book, whatever it was, whatever form it took, wasn't about ghosts. It was about refusing to let history lie still. It was about tending to the names that official ink refused to print. She made remembrance an act of rebellion, and somehow across a century the world finally remembered her back. And maybe that's why her lantern still burns. Because we haven't finished counting yet. Because the work of keeping the light never ends. The voiceover slows the air heavy now, tender. You've just heard a record from a history that never truly closed. Somewhere in Louisiana, a light is still burning for the ones we forgot. If you're listening now, you're part of the counting. So tonight, wherever you are, turn off the lights. Let the dark settle for a moment. And if you see a small flicker in the corner of your eye, don't be afraid. That's not the past haunting you. That's the past remembering itself through you. Because the truth of St. Landry Parish isn't in the fire or the fog. It's in the refusal. The refusal to vanish. The refusal to let silence have the last word. And somewhere under that same sky, a woman with a lantern still walks the edge of the field, her steps slow, her light, unwavering, counting softly into the wind. Each name she whispers is a heartbeat. Each page she turns another dawn breaking. The film closes in silence. Only the sound of crickets and water and wind through the cypress. Then a single bell, distant, faint. 13 chimes. Fade to black. A pause. Then one line appears simple white on black. Keep the light.